Hi, I'm Chris, pronouns he, him. We are starting session 0 for Coyote and Crow Cold Hunger in September 2022 for The Gauntlet, a role-playing game community. There are a number of messages to players throughout the course of the Coyote and Crow guide. And I will talk about that in a moment after I go through some of the safety tools. We are going to go through the standard set of safety tools that we go through when we play gauntlet games. Namely, we will have in place the open door policy. Anybody who needs to leave, feel free to go. During the session, if you can't come back to the next session, no worries. If you can't come back during the session, no worries. We all have lives. Just if you don't mind letting me know if you're coming back, I'd appreciate it. And if you can't, I also understand. We also have lines and veils, which are in the Keeper, which we're using a Google spreadsheet for. Please feel free while I'm talking to go through and fill those out if you haven't. If you could do me a favor and put into the Zoom chat that you just the word okay, then I will know that you have gone through it. There's also a romance tab in here. Romance section in the safety tools tab. While I'm not, planning on any romances, this isn't not a romance heavy game in theory. I want you guys to feel free, I want you all to feel free to do whatever kind of role playing you think is appropriate. Let me just pull up the description of the event. Okay. Yes, Coyote and Crow is a tabletop role-playing game set in an alternate future of the Americas where colonization never occurred. Instead, advanced civilizations arose over hundreds of years after a massive climate disaster changed the history of the planet. Kicking this off as part of what we call CATS, or the concept, aim, tone, and safety tools. The concept is we're in a world of science and spirituality. The future of technology and legends of the past will collide. This role-playing game was created by a team of Native Americans. And this is a world where we're going to start out in the city of Cahokia, a bustling, diverse metropolis along the Mississippi River. So we are expecting that you don't have any prior system knowledge. You did have access to the Keeper in advance if you were able to review it. No obligation to do that. We're only going to use D12s for this. So we're going to use the roll with me system for that. They suggest that you use 9 light D12s and 3 dark D12s. So I haven't totally gotten my head around how to do that but I'm sure we'll figure that out during this session 0. I'm expecting that if we finish our characters, I expect that we will just begin the introductory encounter. And this is going to be a 4-session campaign. There's always a possibility that I could go further if people want to renew. And we're playing through pretty much rules as written, the introductory encounter. This is, as I mentioned to some of you, this is a sort of meaty trad game, in my opinion, compared to some of the things that I have played recently. So it means that going through the Keeper and figuring out some of those stats could take a little extra time, and it just seems simpler to go through the intro encounter than to try to homebrew anything right now. We also, along with the cats that we just went through, the only other thing I'll mention is that there's possible horror elements. A lot of the supernatural stuff is monster type related, and it seems a little bit fun to make this have a possible horror element to it. Given that it's cyberpunk. And the reality is a lot of the 450-page book or so gives you a lot of space to do what you want with it, which is a blessing, but also a little bit of a curse for the new GM. So horror feels like something that we could lean into. I would also say in terms of tone, if you all are open to it, especially given a fair amount of the seriousness and possible 484 pages, thanks. Yeah, possible tensions around around some of the subject matter, and I'll get into that in a second, I'd suggest that we think about this in terms of a little bit lighthearted and fun, but very careful, and respectful, for reasons that this was created by a team of Native Americans. And there are a lot of points in the book that explain, if you are non-native, please do the following, please respect the following. So that's tone, concept, aim, and the only other safety tool I'll bring up is the X card. So if anybody finds anything that they think is insensitive or just something that they don't want to see happen, feel free to put up an X. An example of that happened in play in my life a long time ago was I was a new player, and a bunch of people were ganging up on me, given that my character was a new PC in the campaign, and all of the people who'd been playing for a while kind of excluded me. And it was one of those things, if I thought about it, I could have said, hey, can we X card this? Like, I have agency in this game too, maybe. So, I mean, anything that you feel uncomfortable with, just to give you an example, please feel free to do that. So that's safety tools. Now, I wanted to go through what they suggest we read to the players to make sure that we are careful about that. And before I do that, is there anybody on the call who is Indigenous who would like to reveal that they are Indigenous, given that there is some conditional communication here? If so, please feel free to speak up or put something in the chat. So, as it says here, if you do not have heritage Indigenous to the Americas, we ask you do not incorporate any of your knowledge or ideas of real-world Native Americans into the game. Not only may this be culturally insensitive, but many of the assumptions you might make would not fit into this timeline. Instead, delve into the details of the world you're given without trying to rewrite history or impose your perspective. Specifically, please avoid the following. Please avoid assigning your character the heritage of a real-world tribe or First Nation. Please avoid assigning your character a two-spirit identity. I can't speak more to that. I don't believe that they identify two-spirit identity in this. So this is possibly, if you have more knowledge than I do, please don't use that knowledge. Though I apologize if it is in the book and I missed it. Please avoid using any words taken from Indigenous languages that aren't used as proper nouns in the game materials or listed as being part of Chahi. And I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I started to listen to an actual play. I don't recall, but Chahi is the vocabulary or vernacular that is actually used in this world. And please avoid the following: speaking or acting in any fashion that mimics what are almost certainly negative stereotypes of Native Americans. Towards the end of the book, they point out racists and bigots cannot play Coyote and Crow. There are a couple other things. So I appreciate that. I'm sure you all want to hear what the writers of the book said. It's a few more paragraphs. So I'm going to go through just a little bit more quickly. I do think that it's interesting that I wasn't able to find any kind of starter guide for players outside of actually purchasing the full PDF. So if you all in fact did find something like that and have read through this, feel free to let me know. So in the real world, the terms Indians, First Nation peoples, Indigenous, and others are often used semi-interchangeably. Please keep in mind, though, in this alternate world, none of those words exist or would ever be used again. Indians, First Nation people, or Indigenous. The aforementioned labels are all products of colonialism, and in this game, colonization never happened. Instead, people refer to themselves by their given or chosen names. As an aside from what I read in the book, they do seem to just refer to people with one name, which as complicated as coming up with character names in all systems may simplify things for everyone. While you were creating the list, while you went into the sheet already, you may have seen they suggested a list of names, and then they had a website that would let you generate names as well. So instead, people refer to themselves by their given or chosen names, their tribes. the city they live in, and to some degree, the nations of which they are citizens. We'll go into that in a second. What the nations are for this intro encounter, you don't necessarily need to know it all, but we'll talk about that. If you're playing with other players who are native, do not be afraid to ask respectful questions about their own tribal identities in relation to things that are happening in the game. We suggest you ask those questions away from the game table. Please remember that Native American is a very loose term and that Indigenous people are an incredibly diverse group. You wouldn't expect someone from Belgium to know about Irish history. Much the same applies here. However, don't be afraid to play this game. The world in this book is rich and diverse, full of science and spirituality. The people of this world do all of the same things you do. They love, work, aspire, struggle, hurt, heal, fail, and triumph. Play your characters as people, not natives, and you'll be fine. Okay. Note to all players, throughout this book, you'll see, so you don't have access to the book, but I'm assuming this is still relevant. You'll see commonly used words capitalized, for example, abilities. Anytime you see a word capitalized, it means that the word is a specific game meaning to be found in the glossary. Additionally, anytime you see a word you aren't familiar with, it's likely a Chahi word. This is a fictional trade language we've created for everyone to use and will help you feel more immersed in the world of Coyote and Crow. So not sure that you'll have much access to that unless I introduce it or unless you have access to the playing materials. I'd ask everybody up front, but sorry, Puckett, I didn't ask you. Have you had a chance to read the materials? Not that there was any requisite to do that.
Very, very briefly and loosely.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I read the entire guide, created a sample character, created the keeper. I'll say that the equipment section, got to a point where it was more the reading it quickly. And when we get into it, you are going to be playing Suyata. You're going to be playing the police. There are 5 nations, and they basically the predicament or the situation that the 5 nations found themselves in was a global, massive, devastating climate event, ultimately, succinctly resulting in the north of North America, as we know it. They call it Masa King. Let's see, I've got it on my desktop here. Makasing. They call it Makasing. So I'll refer to it by that going forward. The north of Makasing being covered in ice. And slowly over the course of something like 700 years, it started to melt, and some of the different capabilities of the 5 nations developed as a result of their being able to respond in terms of how much they were hit by the ice. And the other event that occurred was the Adnani. Again, this is something that, let me make sure I'm pronouncing it right. Abilities. Yeah, the Adnani, yeah. The purple streak that went across the sky something like 700 years ago and took a few generations, or it might have been 400 years ago, but it took a few generations to settle in. And everything that was living, there was a chance that something purple would appear on them, whether it was plants, animals, or humans, and ultimately be cultivated and turned into a power. And during an adolescent rite of passage, adolescents were given the opportunity to embrace a path based on whatever type of creature had that purple on it, that they extracted the magical juice and gave it to that adolescent so that they could embrace the path. So point being, the 2 events were climate, literally a frozen north, and then the ability to get powers. That's in really broad strokes the history. And with that, Is there anything that anybody thinks we should touch on before we jump in and start making characters? At which point I will pause. We can make sure we have done introductions and gotten a chance to start making our characters off camera. Is there anything anybody suggests we bring up? So with that, I will just point out that we are going to take breaks on the hour. The first one will be 10 minutes, second will be 5 minutes. And I'm going to err on the side of finishing early-ish if needed. Given that we've got a few sessions, the introductory session encounter could take a couple of sessions rather than necessarily 3 or 4. And just to give us enough time to really flesh these characters out. So I'm going to pause recording. We are back, having spent a little time creating our characters for Coyote and Crow, and we're sharing characters on screen using the keeper that was built for this. And we're going to start in character keeper order. Again, I'm Chris, pronouns he, him. I'm the story guide, and we're going to go with the first character and the first player on this list, Mawaki.
Hi, I'm Brandon. He. My character is Mawaki, she, who is a seeker on the path of the falcon. She was, as they say, born with a falcon's eye, meaning that she has a natural empath, blessed and cursed with uncanny perception. It's been a curse because sometimes, knowledge of what is going on does not convey understanding, and because great things have been expected of her all her life without anyone being able to clarify for her exactly what those things were going to be. She has marked her destiny, but darned if anyone has been able to tell her exactly what that means and what her gifts are really for. She's a terrible liar. She tends to occasionally blurt out the first thing that occurs to her when meeting a new person. But the people who like her find this charming rather than off-putting. Strangers are a mixed bag.
Awesome. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Mawaki's ability and the stats that are important and the critical skills?
Her most important stats are perception and spirit, because empathy is a spirit gift as much as it is actually the ability to perceive things. And so she has had training in these. She is good at getting the truth out of people. She's also had some training in religion and in spiritual healing, as well as a smattering of other things that her forebears thought would be important in her doing police work.
Awesome. So did she know that she was going to be doing police work?
No. They wanted, originally they saw it that she's going to be that she's going to be a spiritual leader of some sort, or perhaps a diplomat between tribes and such like that. But her knack for saying the wrong thing torpedoed any perception that her gifts lay in that particular direction. So she has been seconded to police work as a way that she could at least use her ability to understand people without treading on people's toes too much. Awesome. In ways, she can't be relied upon to keep her mouth shut. And the sort of the primary needs that people have of their of their advisors and diplomats are the ability to keep quiet and occasionally prevaricate. And she's terrible at both of those things.
Awesome. Now there's something that I should have mentioned to everyone here. And in fact, if you'd looked at this earlier, when you looked at the keeper, I'd updated it just before the session started. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but maybe we'll go back around and people can think about this on their own if this helps them. This is a 4-session campaign, but one of the XP triggers, so to speak, or mechanisms that they have is short-term goals. And very specifically, those are to gain a skill rank in a current or new skill, or buy something above your wealth rank. So the idea is you should be, if you're interested in doing these, basically you can gain a skill rank by actually, exercising that skill in a session in the number of sessions equal to the new skill level you want. So if you wanted to increase, ceremony from 6 to 7, which is pretty much what the 7 is kind of the max that they ever really suggest on a skill, which was something I should have mentioned as we were going through some of the stat conversations, because I do see that there's a couple that are above 7, which I think is totally fine. Just a good piece of guidance. Back to that point, if you want to take a short-term goal to increase a stat, skill, you would be needing to, practice that skill, those number of sessions that you want to increase it to. Since it's only a 4-session campaign, perhaps we'll get a little creative with that, so that we, encourage you to actually use these triggers. The other thing you can do is your character can be trying to get something above their wealth rank without having to make a check. So normally the way you would acquire new stuff is you would use your wealth rank and roll dice and see if you could afford or find some new piece of tech. But the idea here is, like, maybe you're trying to build your own vehicle and you're constantly scrounging around. It's your pet project, or something like that. And so that's a short-term goal. Basically, the number of sessions it takes is equal to its cost rank. So given this is a 4-session campaign, 3, if you really look at it in terms of this being a session 0, we can get a little bit creative. We can just say maybe every session, you get double that amount that you'd get. But if you want to think about that in terms of role playing, you don't have to think about that right now for Mawaki, but there is a very specific definition of short-term goals. Long-term goals, it's to try to get a new ability, increase a new stat, get a new gift, increase the level of a current gift, decrease the level of a burden. So that's another thing to think about. We don't even have to figure that out in this session per se, but if while other people are talking, you have some kind of idea and you want to think about it for your own, since we still have to do that part, feel free to. In terms of Mawaki, do you want to talk about, I think what would be helpful for us to all get towards, we'll go around the keeper a couple times in keeper order, would be to think about how your gifts and burdens or any other background impacts NPCs who we could run into, so that I could pull them into the campaign, so that you all could bounce off of each other's NPCs, have NPCs in common, have backgrounds in common. So in terms of your blessings and burdens, if you're okay with us jumping into there, is there anything here that you would like to tell us in terms of, are there any people here who, like you mentioned, family, who you might want to think about an NPC for?
Absolutely. I think my mother is the one who took me to the spirit talker, and said, this one's special. Make sure that that she gets particular training, and I've always felt her eye upon me, whether she's there or not.
Awesome. And in terms of your ability, I see telepathically communicate with soul, the Raven's Call perception ability. Some of these are a mouthful. This one is quite a mouthful in terms of the long description. Given that some of us don't have the actual rule book, I don't want to put you on the spot of having read this entire thing. Do you feel like you have a grasp of what this ability does?
I do. Yeah, it permits telepathic communication to quite a long distance, actually, if you're strongly acquainted with someone you've established it before.
And while we were doing some role playing during character development, it sounded like this was what you suggested, how you perhaps had accidentally spied on Thonga's thoughts. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
Did I misunderstand that? Yeah.
You're not supposed to do that. They've tried to emphasize to me that you don't do this. And I do remember to do it most of the time, but sometimes I get excited.
Awesome. All right. So let's move on to Tala.
Yeah. Tala is a scout on the path of the Coyote.
And Mark,
Coyote.
I'm going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm trying to be careful to use your PC's names, but please introduce yourself as well and your pronouns.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm Mark. I go by he or them. My character is Tala, she or them. And Tala is a scout on the path of the Coyote. Tala is, I think, the youngest here, or tied for the youngest. And I think she was a street kid who came in contact with the police a lot, and eventually decided that would be a better path to take than any of the other inevitable ones. She has a gift called the Chameleon's Shine that allows them to become harder to see, and it's not an optical camouflage. She actually affects the minds of people who are trying to see her. So that's fun. She does intelligence work, investigation, operatives stuff, a little bit of social maneuvering, a little bit of skullduggery. Kind of all-around investigator type.
Awesome. Do you have any thoughts in terms of NPCs? Are they tied in directly? I see financial, unsavory types, companions, young scoundrels. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, so she owes some money to some unspecified person. I'm totally happy to make NPCs and get in trouble with, and has an informal network of folks that she came up with, and their kin that she can tap into for intelligence. And she tends to be, or at least thinks of themselves as unremarkable, so you can blend into a crowd without too much trouble.
Awesome. And I probably, for the hordes of people listening to this, should have pointed out that these are all Suyata. Suyata is the police that is, at least in Cahokia, which is the city that this is taking place in, on the continent of Makasing, in the Freelands. But I believe Suyata is actually helping across all of the 5 nations maintain peace. But these are specifically in Cahokia in the Freelands, and they are a group that is relatively new recruits. Only 15 to 20% of people who actually are exposed to the Adenati develop powers. They've all developed powers, so they were all remarkable, and we're still to determine exactly how they all know each other. So that was awesome. And with that, let's hear about Anoma.
All righty. So my name's Puckett. I use he, him pronouns. I'll be playing Onawa. She uses she, her pronouns. And Onawa is an orphan. She is 19 years old. She was orphaned several years ago. She was about 14 and has a younger sister who is several years younger. She's about 12 now. And naturally, Onawa is responsible for her despite her relatively young age, and despite her sister having this uncanny knack for being in the worst possible situation at the worst possible time. So Onawa constantly has to kind of scold Nia, her younger sister, and kind of try to get her on the good foot. Onawa also has a rival, and her rival is Hani, who's another tinkerer and always seems to be competing with Onawa. She's always trying to create new inventions. She's trying to outdo Onawa's inventions. She's always trying to come up with something more clever, something smaller, something smarter. So it keeps Onawa on her toes. She has a lab that she retreats to, and I don't know, there may be some industrial espionage going on there with Hani, trying to sneak in and find out what Onawa is working on now.
That sounds like a juicy opportunity for tie into long-term goals if you're interested in that at some point.
Sure.
Given that this is a tinkerer. And yeah, you've got Onawa has programming, hacking, Magbo.
She's very smart, and she's not always able to hide that. She works on technology and weapons primarily. It's been interesting to her because she likes to tinker quite a bit, and she likes to find new things. She likes to integrate systems. And she has a special facility, actually, strangely enough, with implanting cybernetics, even though that's not something that most people talk to her about. But there's more than several people who are wandering around now who would otherwise not be wandering around because Onawa managed to replace an organ here and there, and nothing important, just things like hearts, lungs, livers, that sort of thing. Stuff that for the most part is hidden unless they need to see another physician. But she's actually skilled in medicine too, so they may not need to.
So you've got here, Onawa's inventions have made her famous. Is that related to what you're talking about?
That actually tends to be more along the lines of the technological innovations that she's pioneered, such as integrating second eyes with magbos. So there are certain things that she has done that make the second eye a vastly more useful tool out in the wilderness than it otherwise would be. It brings up information. It pings databases. It brings up information on citizens, whether they have been accused of crimes, what their job is, what their name is, who their family connections are. So, yeah, her inventions, and this is something that she didn't really think about, her inventions, at least with the second eye innovations, kind of trample on privacy a bit. So it is, while it is true that people will come to her with ideas and expect her to listen to whatever it is that they think might be the next big thing, it's also the case that she's gotten some blowback here and there because people don't particularly appreciate some of the things that she's made. But they do happen to be very useful tools for, say, a police force.
Yeah. And just to be completely, to make sure that given that this keeper is a work in progress, were you intending for Onawa to have an intelligence 4, or were you assuming this was an intelligence 6, given that there's 2 extra points here?
Intelligence 6.
Got it. Okay, so when we could do a little bit of balancing here, this is my fault. I actually meant to mention this, and then I realized that. So the way this is set up is we need to manually add those 2 here for free. So
Oh,
if you want her to have a 6, sorry about that. I couldn't find a way to automate it. If you want her to have a 6, you've
yes.
got to like just lose a couple points somewhere else. And I just remembered that.
And just manually enter that on the sheet.
So yeah, what I would do here, I'm just going to do this for a second. I'm just going to put in a 6 here. And so you'd have to find 7 points somewhere else. Unfortunately, the only thing that 2 gets you is if you enter 2, it costs you 0 points. So I'm just going to do that for 1 second. If I enter 2, it's 0 points. That was the only, yeah, sorry about that. That's because I remembered you wanted her to have a very high stat, and I was thinking, uh-oh. So sorry, that's a little bit more math and juggling to do. But you should be able to just knock out a couple other stats, whether you want to do that now. If everybody else understood that, if there was any other misunderstanding, like, for Tala, if she was supposed to have intelligence 5, it means we've got to find another point somewhere and all of that. Thank you for continuing to quality control and playtest this keeper. And I apologize for any frustration that it is creating. So that said, we've got a couple more go rounds here of bonds and NPCs. And it's possible that this session will be mostly character creation rather than jumping into the encounter. We will see how that goes, given that this is a meaty trad process. So let's introduce your name and your pronouns and your character's name and your pronouns for Thanga.
My name's Mari. My pronouns are she, her. I'm playing Thanga. Pronouns are he, him. He's a whisperer on the path of the deer. He's good with people and likes people, and he's charming and persuasive. His mother is a high-ranking Suyata, and that is why he's gone into this, but he is insecure about his position and feels that he only got it due to nepotism and doesn't deserve it, regardless of whether that is in fact true. And yeah, his gift, or the ability, that's what it's called. I picked Deer Smile, which lets him calm people in earshot.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. So calm a group forestalling violence with a charisma and will check. And I know that we didn't get to talk. I forgot to ask about Anawa's ability substitute intelligence. We'll swing back around when we come back around again. We can talk about that for a second. So Thanga, I see the burden plagued by doubts about whether his position as a Suyata is undeserved. And I think one thing that all of us should do for our quirks, burdens, and gifts is find a mechanic that we can add. So I think pretty much the most straightforward is add a +1 or a -1. So again, the way this works is you're trying to get above a target. So a burden could add a +1 to something like, and we can be specific and creative. It could be something like, if when Thanga is trying to, I don't want to force this on you by any means, when Thanga is trying to make there's something in the game called a social encounter, and you're trying to like win it. I mean, it's like in other games, there's parallels where you're trying to persuade or coerce somebody. It could be that if you're trying to persuade or coerce somebody in the presence of other Suyata, you get a +1 to make it harder, like you're more self-conscious. Completely up to you as to how you want to do it. And that's not unique to Thanga. That's for the rest of the characters as well. We should just try to find some kind of mechanic. And then similarly, we could find a way, or we could just keep it narrative, role play, opportunistic situations to leverage the family level 1, right? It could be, we could either specify something like, but you have information resources, so I think that's fine. That's great. And you get specialized skills here. So you get storytelling. Oh, that's really cool. And just to call this out about this game, comedy is something that is brought up a lot. Probably reason it's first on this list, other than, vague semi-alphabetical. Comedies are really important, just for what it's worth, in case that changes anybody's thought. It's a really important way of and I'm looking for the words because I don't have the exact parallel. There's no alcohol in the game, and comedy is something that people do, that they indulge. Comedians become very successful. They perform at hospitals. They help comfort people, I think is the thought, if they're at hospitals. Not saying at all that Thanga should have something to do with comedy, but it's an interesting aside now that we're looking at this storytelling. That's really cool. Can you give me a sense? So yeah, Thanga's an interesting character because his mother was in the Siyata. He's very good with people, and he's joined. Do you have and then you got to impose order. Do you have a sense, do you have a sense of how, his storytelling and charisma and all that plays out in terms of his role? Does he have a specific type of role? Is he an officer, psychologist? You know what I mean? Like, and you may not have an answer to this,
Yeah.
like rather than, a fighter per se.
I was thinking for situations where they might be able to like persuade somebody to come in or whatever they need to do, or to de-escalate situations, that he could be somebody they send in.
Negotiator.
Negotiator, yeah, that's sort of like,
Yeah.
that would be sort of his role on a team, maybe. Or
Hostage negotiation is a classic specialty.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What was that, Brandon?
I said a classic specialty is hostage negotiation.
Yeah. Yeah. And there could even be, but this is based off of personal experience that I heard recently, some anecdote. Could even be that his mother didn't want him to get in the line of fire, and so wanted him to be in like a softer role. I'm completely making that up. I don't want to push that on you. I just thought that was a really funny thing that I heard recently of somebody who potentially ended up in one of those positions because of nepotism. So yeah, that's awesome. So if we swing back around, what I wanted to do, I know we have a couple of things to massage in terms of character creation. But on top of that was build some bonds between characters. So I've got a couple of probing questions that I'm going to throw out. And if anybody happens to, things like finishing character stats and short-term goals, long-term goals, we can also do that offline. So I was thinking, if you're okay with this, if it's okay for Mawaki to have had this situation, I was thinking that perhaps Tala was working with you on a case, but betrayed your trust at a moment. And it's up to you how that happened. And how did you feel about that? And do you know why they did this? And this is only if both of you are comfortable with this, because I'm not trying to set up a huge amount of tension. Just is that okay with you for Mawaki to have been betrayed by Tala? It could be about something minor, something major for a moment. Is that okay with you about Tala, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, two things that come to mind. One thing could have been that either that I said something to you that I found out that you then disregarded and went off and did the thing that, that you thought was right. And I felt like you didn't listen to me at all. Or alternatively, that you kind of, you gain the confidence of someone in a case by poking fun at my social quirks.
Yeah, the second one sounds more like Tala.
Okay. And it's like, oh, that's don't worry, she's okay. And it's like, you didn't have to do that.
How did Mawaki deal with that afterwards?
Maliki was really quiet for a while, and then she rattled off, not in front of anybody. She rattled off a list of Tala's quirks, which she could have said to anybody who would care to listen.
And how did Mawaki find out that this happened? Was Mawaki probing in Tala's mind, or
No? I think Tala was probably just not very subtle about it.
I imagine Tala would have done it while we were working together. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I kept quiet about it because I didn't want to get an argument in front of a possible criminal, and it's like then but afterwards it was like, why did you God damn it, this is hard enough. People already think I'm enough of a freak that you don't have to make things worse.
do you have any thoughts about long-term goals or short-term goals, or we're going to wait on that?
I'll wait on that.
Okay. And in terms of gifts and burdens, looks like you've got some of your stuff on here. So that's great. So let's and on the other hand, so Tala and Anawa encountered some unspeakable force or entity, and Anawa saved you from this. What did they do, and did it cost them something? If you're okay with this, Puckett, for Anawa, and if you're okay with this, Tala.
Cybernetics.
Yeah, I was thinking it would have something to do with the hacking or the cybernetics. Since you are a bit better at that than I am, maybe I came to you for help with something and we uncovered that together. What would we uncover?
Something mystical and magical in the network.
Yeah, I like that. Something
The ghost in the machine.
Yeah, not normally explainable by what we're used to. Yeah, something intelligent and malign that's not supposed to be there.
Well, do you think it's malign or just an alien intelligence that doesn't understand?
Yeah, maybe not malignant.
Its actions may be harmful.
Yeah,
but
harmful,
it doesn't
but not
intend harm.
necessarily. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah, I like that.
So do you think maybe you got hurt and I had to perform some life-saving procedure, and now you're basically hooked up in my lab whenever you need a tune-up or something goes sideways?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that.
And are you hiding it from other people?
I'm probably not hiding it from the department, but I'm probably hiding it from my contacts for sure.
Okay.
And your contacts, meaning the other youths that are.
Yeah.
Why are you hiding it from them?
It could be used as leverage. I think only in the department folks know it because we're theoretically professionals, but I don't want anyone else to have that leverage over me.
And it's probably just like your commanding officer who knows, right?
Yeah.
Like it's basically a need-to-know basis.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Did it cost Anawa anything to do this?
Ooh. So what if at a young age, when my parents died, I tried to save my mother by performing a similar procedure, and that wound up costing her her life. And Nia made me swear never to do that again.
Hmm.
And the only way to save Tala's life was doing something similar or doing the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's just that
Yeah.
now I have the tech dialed in. Now I know what I'm doing. And now I don't make mistakes because I had that extraordinarily harsh lesson.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yep.
And
love
if
it.
anybody has a problem with it being my mother, you know, we can change it to my father. You know, if we're concerned
Right.
about fridging or anything like that.
Right. And that, well, and no, thank you for bringing it up. I meant to and did not talk about the lines and veils, so I'm going to jump over to that for a moment. I'm going to go through the lines first. So the lines that we have, things that we cannot talk about, are cannibalism, graphic injuries, gore, harm to children, harm to pets, domestic animals, harm to wild animals, homophobia. Harm to wild animals is a veil. So we're going to fade to black on that. I'll come back to fade to blacks in a moment. Line through homophobia, transphobia, mind control, pandemic plague, racism, sexism, sexual assault, violence, twins, and blunt force head trauma. And the veils to fade to black are bullying, harm to wild animals, sexual content, slavery, suicide, and torture. And there is interest in romance. And we have some notes here that I am sharing on screen that are that I'm entertained by. Break my heart and oh yes, in terms of romance with PCs. So I hope it's okay that I'm sharing that on the Zoom. The yeah, we were talking about safety because you were talking about the NPC of your parent. And I think the Nia idea feeds in almost with your burden. I mean, even as tangentially, right? So it's almost being accounted for there. So
I kind of feel like maybe Nia goes off on those little adventures and gets into trouble because she's rebellious and knows that it's going to basically make a mess that I have to clean up.
Yep. That sounds like that. Yeah, that's a great motivation.
And
so
just to make it simple, let's say it resulted in my father's death instead of my mother's death.
Okay.
And Nia made me promise never to do that again.
And so is there a cost there, or are you costing, is it now that you created this vulnerability that if she finds out about it, there's a risk she will be upset?
It is absolutely a landmine waiting to be stepped on.
There you go. Awesome. Okay. So now.
But that's okay because I'm good with cybernetics, so I can replace the leg.
That's right. Exactly. So I am going to jump ahead because that was a really juicy one that used both Tala and Anawa, and we may come back. So I'm going to talk about Thanga. So there is a group that offered you a great deal of assistance, maybe to help you solve your case. Perhaps you were tempted, given you have a reputation that you feel like you need to prove, but there was a great cost. Did you take the help, and how did that impact your decision? How did that decision impact you today? Group approached you with help, whether you took it or not. What's the impact? And if in any case anybody wants a minute to think about this stuff, that's also fine.
I think.
And I would also encourage us to think about that. Perhaps that group could have been a group that somebody else is tied up in. So those sorts of groups could be the unsavory companions that Tala hangs out with. They could be the spiritual group that Mawaki was possibly going to be part of. Could even be a group that Hani, Anawa's opponent, was part of. Some ideas.
I think I like the idea of something, some slightly more unsavory group approaching Thanga to help, or offering assistance in something. So maybe Thala's unsavory group. Maybe there was some case involving some rivals of them or something, and they had intel, and that Thanga didn't think was entirely appropriate the help they offered and passed up the assistance, but perhaps then didn't, succeed in, solving that case or convincing whoever to come in, that then that has furthered their doubts about whether they're adequate at their job.
And possibly even that group has come back to Thanga and said, next time you need help, maybe you really do want our help. I mean, if you want, like, leaving an opening for leaving a kind of opening.
Yeah.
If you're okay with that, is that okay? Since I may have to try to find some NPCs to tie you guys up with at various points. So the opening is still there. Awesome. And what I'm going to ask is, at some point, not tonight, but or not in this session, but until next session, if each of you could go into the NPC tab and either add some images or add some names to the images that are there and the roles to tie them, that would be very helpful. And anybody who does it, we will just say that you have made it one more step towards one of your short-term goals. And since we're going to do it 2 times per session, let's say it's you've made it 2 ticks on the clock towards a short-term goal. So we've gotten through a couple of bonds. We've gotten bonds between, let's see, and there's a little bit of a chat going on here that if there's anything that we should bring up here, would anybody like to summarize this? Is this helpful for the group?
Yeah, I think the entity or whatever it was that we discovered or uncovered, I think Tala at least has not told anyone or tried to keep it a secret of some kind, partially because Tala is, I think, coming up the computer stuff and hacking was a way that she could show her worth, or that she knew something, and this is so completely out of the realm of what she understands about that totally freaks her out, and she doesn't want to, but I think it still tries to communicate with us somehow when we go in there. So that could be I might drop that into a curse or a spirit connection for a burden.
Oh, awesome. So wait, if I'm hearing it correctly, you're saying just getting the names right, Anawa saved Tala, and now this thing is still reaching out, trying to connect with you.
Yeah.
That seems awesome. That could be burden or a gift, but yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
two
Kala
thoughts.
is a burden. It might be a gift for a while.
So you're not that thrilled with this thing reaching out to you.
Yeah.
Do you think it tinkers with your implants?
That's yeah.
Possibly. Yeah.
Like maybe it thinks it'll help him function better if it does this.
Yeah, I like that.
And I'm just tickled to death that this entity exists. Like, I feel like it needs a name, but I don't know what that name should be. And maybe that's something we can come up with over the next week, Mark.
Yeah.
Maybe a name that you don't like to call it and a name that just delights me.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's chosen its own name. But I would be absolutely over the moon to discover that something so unique and I hesitate to call it strange, but uncanny, perhaps.
Yeah. Weird
that,
in the sense, yeah.
well, you might think it's weird. I
mean,
would look
weird,
at it
weird in the magical sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I have this sneaking suspicion that I'm just over the moon. And anytime you come to me grumbling about it, it's like, wait, what did it say this time? So you don't like it, and I'm just thrilled to death and excited.
Yeah.
Even if I do have to like reset your tuning from time to time because it tinkered with the settings. And what kind of cybernetics do you think you have now? Do you think it's just like a simple organ replacement or two, or do you think it was more complex?
I think I might balance it off with it might be like a either a second eye built-in thing or a net check kind of thing that had to maybe it burned something out when we were in the network, and that had to be like part of my brain was replaced, or
Eyes
part
and
of the
brain.
interface. Eyes and brain. Yeah,
Those are pretty important.
Yeah.
So in the interest of time, I'm just gonna ask that you all figure out
Take
how
it
to
offline.
mechanize that, or we can pick it up at the beginning of the next one. And given this juicy connection you have, I'm tempted to throw one more out there between Mawaki and Thanga. I know we're short on time, so here's my thought. If you're open to this, Mawaki, Thanga's friend came to you about a case, and shortly thereafter turned up dead. How does Thanga feel about this? And I'm curious how you think Thanga feels about this, and I'm curious from Thanga how Thanga feels about this.
Well, I want more. I want there to be more to this sort of link of. I want there to be more detail here.
Yeah, I was thinking that in case you want, I wanted to give you the rope in case you wanted it, but like perhaps you're responsible, or your negligence is responsible for this, or you feel like you're going to be improperly blamed for it. Like, so a friend came to you asking for help about a case, and then they showed up dead. So it's up to you. Did you do something?
That's a pretty heavy distrust burden.
Okay.
For short series.
Completely. Yeah. I wasn't sure if it would be interesting, given that you were attracted to Thanga, if it would be the sort of, but I understand if it's too distrusting completely. Yeah.
It does make me think of something else, which is kind of a weird thing.
Yeah.
Suppose that a friend of Thanga's was tangentially involved in a case, and they ended up dying for some reason.
Yeah.
But circumstances kind of, but they took a while to die.
Mm-hmm.
And I was with them during the time they died.
Mm-hmm.
And and they unburden themselves to me.
Mhm.
Um,
Does Thanga know about this?
there's got to be some hint of something to um,
And we could leave it open-ended that they told you something about Thanga, and then we can just let that play out. I mean,
um, oh, how about this? Um, no, okay, no, I'm not going to talk about this because this is an actual. It's not specifically a Native American thing, but it's kind of a shamanistic thing, so maybe it's not appropriate.
okay.
Um, the they wanted to unburden themselves in order basically to be able to go on.
Mhm.
You know, so this is not something specifically like that they wanted to tell Thanga,
Right. Yeah.
but rather something, there's some things about their life that they felt like they had to tell somebody
Mhm.
in order to be able, because you know, this is a
Mhm.
very common spirit belief, you know, not just in Native American cultures. Catholicism has it, right?
Right.
That you know, you unburden yourself before you die, and anybody who dies alone, you know, is at risk of losing their way to the nice life because they carry that load with them, and it can harm their chances of going where their spirit wants to go.
Yep. That's
and
great.
so they basically, and of course, my particular gift facilitates this, and in fact, my training facilitates this.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it makes me wonder if I oughtn't just to be, you know, someone who deals with the dying rather than a police officer.
I have a question for Thanga, if I can interrupt for one moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so are you comfortable with Thanga knowing that this happened and feeling some sort of, I mean, how would you feel if you knew that Milwaukee did this for your friend?
Probably grateful. I was pondering whether this friend could have also been like a former romantic partners of Thanga's to make it a little bit closer relationship, and therefore maybe Milwaukee has heard more details about Thanga's past and, you know, stuff that perhaps Thanga would not have shared personally. Nothing like important, but just sort of personal.
I think that sounds great.
Awesome. Thank you all. We've gone a few minutes over. Appreciate going through all this. We did a ton in this number of hours, and we will please try to add some NPCs to the sheet. Hopefully I'll see you all next week, and we'll jump right into the action.
All right.
See y'all next week. Be
See
well.
you next week.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.